Welcome to the third episode in our 2024 travels. Hi, my name is Rosemary, one half of R&R Living Life, the other being my husband Rick. Our journey today sees us leave Whyalla and make our way further south along the Lincoln Highway. The countryside was mostly open farming, with cropping commencing about 50 kilometres from Cowell. It intrigued me that being so close to the sea, farmers could crop on sandy, salty soil. No doubt a lot of fertiliser is involved. Just north of Cowell, we stopped in at the seaside town of Lucky Bay, home to a modest strip of coastal homes or shacks. I was surprised and intrigued by the huge amount of seagrass washed up on the shoreline. As we made our way into the seaside town of Cowell, about halfway between Whyalla and Port Lincoln, we could not miss the impressive silo art. Continuing on, we made our way to the foreshore where we stopped and went for a walk along a mangrove boardwalk overlooking Franklin Harbour. Wow, what an amazing expanse of water! Franklin Harbour is virtually a landlocked harbour with a narrow entrance about 300 metres wide, with the entrance like a fast flowing river when the tide is running. In the early part of this century and until the advent of reliable motor transport, Franklin Harbour was an important shipping port. Several times a week it was a common sight to see three coastal vessels tied to the jetty. On our return from the harbour, we travelled along a broad main street lined with pine trees and charmingly, distinctly South Australian architecture, before passing the charming Franklin Harbour Hotel, originally built as a single-storey hotel in 1881, with the second story being added around 1907. From Cowell, we made our way along the Bird's Eye Highway to Cleve. We stopped to look at the Mid-Row Creek former school site, first opened in 1913 and closed in 1938, during which the school had 13 teachers. The sandstone ruins of the school was typical of many other one-teacher schools in the district and shows just how small one-teacher schools of yesteryear were. From the school ruins we made our way to the commemorative monument of the author of the Gumnut Babies Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie, May Gibbs, who had lived in the area as a young girl in the 1880s. The monument consisted of a plaque under a lovely old gum tree beside the road. We made use of the gum tree and had morning tea. On arriving in Cleve, we parked Gidget at the RV park. Cleve is located in the central east Eyre Peninsula and is mainly a sheep and wheat growing area, with the small town providing services for the surrounding farms. Prior to European settlement, the district was characterised by dense mallee, while today it looks vastly different, with much of the land cleared for farming. Once we had unhooked Gidget, we set off for a walk through town, as on the way in we had seen two impressive sculptures. In the centre of the main street was an impressive one-of-a-kind horse sculpture created by Cleve local Peter Crosby. The Clydesdale horse is an impressive, intricate metal sculpture. Alongside Bonnie the Clydesdale is Reggie the Wedgie, another magnificent sculpture of reclaimed metal. Both sculptures need to be viewed up close, as the amount of detail and the incorporation of various metal materials is staggering. Both Rick and I thought that the effort of seeing them up close was well worth the walk uptown. The following day we drove to Kimber, a typical wheatbelt town, with a railway and huge wheat silos. The town was designed primarily to service the surrounding grain and sheep properties, but today calls itself as the town that is halfway across Australia. On the way into town, we passed the big galah that stands in front of the halfway across Australia gem shop on the Eyre Highway. Today, we were dodging showers. We drove around town checking out the businesses in the main street before driving to White Snob Lookout, where we viewed two statues, Edward John Eyre and his Aboriginal assistant Whyalla. From the lookout, we also enjoyed the views of the surrounding countryside, the town, and the Roora Stormwater Catchment Project that provides the town with the equivalent of 5 Olympic pools worth of additional rainwater every year. On returning to town, we viewed Kimber grain silos from the viewing platform on Railway Terrace. The silo art is an impressive mural, 25 metres tall and 60 metres wide, with the artwork depicting a young girl in a wheat field at sunset. After leaving Kimber, we made our way along Dark Peak Scenic Drive, where we stopped at Dark's grave on the western side of the beautiful Dark Peak Ranges. Dark's grave and monument stands as a memorial to the first European explorer of the area, John Charles Dark, a surveyor who was mortally wounded by natives when exploring the area in October 1844. We also viewed Carapi Hill, known for being the highest exposed granite rock mass on the Eyre Peninsula and the second largest monolith in South Australia. From Dark's grave, we continue along the drive to Federation Lookout. Though on private property, it had stunning 360-degree views across the district. We did remember to shut the gate on entry and exit to the site, before making our way to the town of Dark Peak, formerly Carapi, and then back through Ruddle to Cleve. Our day exploring was jam-packed with stunning scenery and interesting sights. Hard to believe that we were halfway across Australia. The next day we made our way to Arno Bay, a tiny fishing village on Spencer's Gulf between Port Neale and Cowell. The township sprawls from the huge grain silos near the Lincoln Highway across the flat coastal lands to the town centre. From there we ventured between the muddy tidal Salt Creek to the town's jetty, built in 1882. The jetty was used to supply the area with vital supplies and to ship out the wheat from the hinterland. The navigation light that now stands at the end of the jetty was refurbished in 2011 and was once used to assist the sailing ketches which entered the bay. Rick and I found it energising after sitting in the car to walk the jetties in the small towns we visited. Though safe to wander along it was concerning just how many needed maintenance, and we wondered just how long they would remain safe for people to use. The day was quite warm, so Rick and I decided not to undertake the estuary boardwalk that winds its way through dense mangrove habitats and mudflats, and were just happy to wander the foreshore of the bay, with its captivating clear skies and calm blue waters. Arno Bay offered us an interesting insight into the hardships and hopes which characterised the early development of the Eyre Peninsula. In the earliest days of settlements, the tall clippers which sailed along the coast brought supplies and fertilisers to enrich the impoverished peninsula soils. They took away with them grain and wool. From Arno Bay we made our way to Port Neale, where we once again walked the jetty out into Mottled Cove in Spencer's Gulf. Port Neale is known for its incredibly white sands and aquamarine seas. Historically a grain port, today the town is a small, out-of-the-way place, far removed from the pressures of more modern communities. On the foreshore are huge Norfolk Island pine trees and a large anchor from the Lady Cunard, which operated between Britain and Australia in the late 19th century. The Lady Cunard left Port Pirie on the 19th of January 1880 with a cargo of wheat, but was shipwrecked just off Port Neale. All crew swam ashore safely, thanks to the mostly calm waters of the bay. Work began on the Port Neale jetty in 1911 and was completed in May 1912. Like all the jetties around the coast of the Eyre Peninsula, it was constructed primarily to ship wheat and receive goods needed locally. As the district's agriculture expanded, it began to handle wool and barley. Grain silos and bulk handling facilities were established on the port in 1970. Now, grain is trucked to the Port Lincoln grain terminal. From Port Neal, we made our way to Tumby Bay, with its crystal blue water and pine tree lined foreshore. The bay was the last major town along the Lincoln Highway before we reached Port Lincoln. We were unable to take our walk along the jetty as it was closed due to storm damage, so to make up for our step count for the day, we checked out the captivating street art. It never ceases to astound me just how many creative people there are. On our way out of town, we stopped to view the impressive silo artwork beside a huge grain storage facility. Another remarkable piece of artwork. From Tumby Bay, we passed through areas of predominantly sheep and wheat farming. As we were travelling in early autumn, unplanted ground was waiting for reliable rain prior to seeding. Being so close to Spencer's Gulf, I am sure with the varied soil types we had seen, from dune swales to sandy plains and loam, soil management would be a significant aspect of farming. As with all farming, without sustainable management of the land, the success of rural life becomes an issue. About 15 kilometres from Port Lincoln, we passed Aerotech, that focuses on delivering airborne solutions to everyday problems across oil, gas, mining, construction, and especially agriculture. Today's journey will see us camped at Great Views of Port Lincoln, with its awesome outlook overlooking Proper Bay, Boston Bay, and the marina. But before we called it a day, we ventured out to Coffin Bay, famous for its oysters. We stopped at a lookout on the way into Coffin Bay that gave us stunning views overlooking the town. Coffin Bay lies at the southern tip of the Eyre Peninsula, where soft sand dunes meet the glassy waters of the bay. Rick and I were interested in seeing the oyster farms just offshore, though neither of us enjoy eating fresh oysters. We wandered the picturesque foreshore, reading the many information boards that told us about the lives of the oyster farmers and the history of the industry. The bay was surrounded by sea and national parks. We drove along the esplanade, marvelling at the blue, blue water. We stopped at Crinoline Point to wander the shoreline and watch the sailing vessels making their way through the calm waters of Killarney Inlet to the boat ramp. I watched the antics of the seagulls, infant Pacific gulls and pelicans, as they fought over scraps being thrown from boats, and as usual I had to find plants and other interesting things to take photos of, like the broken shells on the shoreline. The jellyfish was another interesting creature I watched as it bobbed around beside the jetty. It was so peaceful just watching the antics of the water lovers, both wild and human, at play on the calm waters. So much to do if you were a water lover. On the way out of the bay, we passed the oyster racks that are constantly being nourished from the nutrient-rich seawater and upswelling of the Southern Ocean. On the way back to Port Lincoln, we stopped to check out Big Swamp and Little Swamp, both full of bird life. Our travels today had been jam-packed with water views. The eastern side of the Eyre Peninsula is truly an amazing place to visit, bounded by the Spencer's Gulf on the east and the rugged Gawler Ranges to the north. After spending a quiet morning around camp, we made our way into Port Lincoln, situated on the edge of Boston Bay, the largest natural harbour in Australia, being 3.5 times the size of Sydney Harbour, with granite headlands, sheltered bays, and scenic foreshore islands. In the 1830s, it was considered as a possible state capital with its near-perfect Mediterranean climate, but only the lack of a reliable water supply prevented it from becoming the capital of South Australia. Our first stop for the morning was at the foreshore, where we took a walk along the jetty. The Old Town Jetty, the oldest jetty site on the Eyre Peninsula, was the first jetty built at Port Lincoln and was erected in 1857. Once a hive of activity, with ketches and steamers from Adelaide tied up here, bringing goods to the city before the jetty was closed for commercial purposes in 1936. It is now a popular fishing spot. On our return from the walk along the jetty, we took a stroll along Tasman Terrace, past a life-size bronze statue of Maccabi Diva, the wonder horse which won Melbourne Cup 3 times in 3 consecutive years, a feat that had never been previously achieved and is unlikely to be beaten. Further along the sidewalk was the tuna polar statue, a tribute to all who took part in pioneering tuna fishing. Well-known tuna fisherman Dean Lucan was a local tuna fisherman who won Australia's first weightlifting Olympic gold medal. A statue of Matthew Flinders and a cat was also on the sidewalk. The foreshore walk overlooked Boston Island, located 5 kilometres offshore between Port Lincoln and Cape Donington. Boston Island was settled in the early 1840s when an old slab cottage was constructed that is still standing to this day. From the centre of town, we drove out along parts of the Peninsula Trail that skirts the coastline and foreshore of Port Lincoln, past the old mill lookout, an historic structure built in 1846 as part of a flour mill complex, but never used for that purpose, and to Billy's Point boat ramp, teeming with bird life, and its beach where razorfish can be found. From there we drove on to the Lincoln National Park walking trail entrance. It was truly an enjoyable tour of the area. I am sure there are many other places we have missed on this trip, maybe for another time. After exploring Port Lincoln, we returned to Gidget and made ready for the next leg of our travels. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Join us next time as we continue along the western side of the Eyre Peninsula towards Elliston and Streaky Bay, as we make our way towards the Nullarbor. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R Living Life.